The top 10 legal mistakes that small business owners make. You've started your own business. You've built it. It's your little baby. You want to make sure that it's protected. What are the kind of legal things that we see go wrong where people end up owing money, losing their business, having a huge disaster that was easily avoidable if they just followed some of these top 10 things that people make mistakes of? One, reading contracts. If you're entering into a contract with someone, don't just sign it and assume it's okay and it says what they say it's going to say. It doesn't matter if it's like a franchise agreement or if it's, with a supplier of yours. You really want to make sure that you understand what your obligations are, what your risks are, what your out-of-pocket expenses are going to be, if they can add on other charges, if they can change the terms of the agreement or force you to spend more money. There could be any number of pitfalls in there, and the only way that you're going to know about them is if you read them. Now, if you don't feel like reading it, you can certainly hire a lawyer to do it, or if you have read it and you're not sure about what something means, you can have a lawyer to do it. And while people often balk on spending the extra money, it can really make the difference between success and failure. There's a great example in terms of reading contracts that I've loved for years and years. There is a fellow who wrote a short story, and he was a young publisher or hoping to be published and hoping to sell his short stories. So this man, he made a short story about a character, and he went to a magazine, and the magazine said, hey, we're going to publish it. Here's our contract that for us to publish your story. And so the guy took it to a lawyer to review. The lawyer said, well, the contract's fine, but we're going to take out this one thing where you're giving the rights to the character to the publisher instead of you being able to hold on to them. That character was Tarzan, and it was one of the very first mass-marketed something. TV shows, movies, radio stations, radio programs, lunch boxes, shirts, like all those things. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, and that was back when hundreds of millions of dollars was a lot of money. It still is. But that person who signed the agreement without losing those rights benefited from it. In fact, there's a whole neighborhood near Los Angeles called Tarzania that was his estate that he had from proceeds from that. It's really important to read contracts before you sign them. Next, failing to incorporate. There's lots of good reasons to incorporate. Some of them are going to be financial, and you're going to want to talk to your accountant about whether or not it makes sense for you to incorporate your business from a tax perspective. You have more write-offs, you have more ways of delaying paying taxes or dealing with taxes legally, but it gives you more options. But it also creates a protection, a shield from liability. So if you're running your business properly, you're not defrauding people, you're just running things, but you get sued because you screwed up, the person can win against you, but having that corporate entity means that they're suing the corporation. They can take the assets of the corporation, but they then can't come after your own personal assets, like your home, your car, and that stuff. Only the corporate assets. So incorporating your business is going to be really important. Next, leases. People run into problems with leases all the time. They just sign them and they don't worry about it. It's going to be really important to have a lawyer review your lease with you, again, to make sure that you're not owing money that you weren't aware of. There could be the landlord requires you to pay for snow removal for the entire block, not just for in front of your unit. It could be that you have to redo the entire inside of the property after you move out. It could be that you have a right to extend your lease or you don't have a right to extend your lease. And those are going to be really important for your business. If you want to sell your business, but it can't stay there for another 6 months and then you got to move it out, it's going to really affect the value of what you're selling. Leases are so important. It's essentially the foundation of your business because that's where it's located. Next is something called a unanimous shareholder agreement. Sometimes they're called buy-sell agreements. And if you have a number of shareholders who are part of the business, the corporate structure of your business, then it sets out the rules between them. Think of it as like a prenuptial agreement for people who own a business together. It can set out who does what, who is responsible for what happens to compensation, who makes choices and decisions, who has legal binding authority. What happens to the company if someone goes bankrupt or gets divorced or if someone wants to force the sale of the business. It deals with all those things in advance so that you don't have issues down the road. You can have situations where the relationship breaks up, but the business is safe because you have that agreement in place. It sets up that framework so that everything isn't lost. It's going to be really important for you. Next I want to talk about is intellectual property. Intellectual property is not like a tangible thing, but it's going to be like things like trademarks, your logo, your copyright. So if you publish stuff, who owns the right to that published works? Intellectual property is protected in very specific ways, and if that forms part of what your goodwill or part of what your company is represented, you want to make sure it's protected. Not registering your trademark could mean that someone else could use it, and if you plan later to expand, but someone else is using that in a different geographic area, you haven't protected it, you're not able to move your business and expand it into that area because someone's already got the name. Make sure your trademark is protected is much more complicated than just filing a trade name or incorporating with that name. It's a much broader picture that protects you. So it's really important to protect your intellectual property. Next, we'll talk about some agreements that protect against employees or partners or shareholders or people who you maybe are going to get into business with but haven't. And these would be like a non-competition agreement, a non-solicitation agreement, and a non-disclosure agreement. A non-competition agreement is an agreement with someone where they're saying, yeah, I'm going to work with you, or going to be partner with you, I'm going to work together with you for this business, but if I leave it, I can't compete with your business within a certain amount of time. I can't open up shop next door to you and have that competition. You can set time frames in there. You can set geographic locations. You can set whatever you could come up with in order to protect the interest. Next, a non-solicitation agreement is where you're agreeing with somebody else where if they leave the business, whether it's an employee or a manager or something, where they can't solicit your employees, they can't solicit your clients, they can't solicit your referral sources. It again is set up to protect your business. Last, non-disclosure agreement. If you have sensitive information, or if you don't, but your client list, your referral list could be really important to your business. A non-disclosure agreement is an agreement between two people where the other person can't disclose it, and there can be penalties to them and cost them if they breach that agreement. Next, we're going to talk about employment law stuff. So this is where we have things like a HR manual where you have the rules so your employees know what they can and can't do. It's one thing for you to just randomly make up rules. It's another thing when you have a handbook where people see and sign off that they agree that they can't send harassing emails. They can't use your work platform to follow like a specific political agenda. It allows you to give more protection that way. Also, it lets you to have everything run properly in terms of your agreements with your employees, making sure that your employment agreements are done properly, that you limit your risks as an employer, as a business owner. So it's really important to have those all in place to make sure that you don't have any problems. Next is minute books. No one likes to think about minute books. They're not very exciting. A corporation is like an entity, but you can point to the building it's in, but there's nothing you can point to that's the health of the business itself. There's no vital signs for the business. The minute book is that essentially that chart that shows, is the business still valid? Have all the filings been done every year? Who has signing authority? Who owns it? In that minute book are going to be all the credentials that if you need to get a bank loan, you're going to need it. If you're going to sell the business, you're going to need it. And if you don't have them in place, we've seen situations where a person had all the equity in the world, a piece of property worth $20 million, but they didn't have any of their minute book stuff done and organized. So it meant that the banks wouldn't lend, instead of getting a mortgage at like 3%, they had to get a private loan at 20% from a private lender. Very simple to maintain, but it has to be done consistently. The other advantage, if you have a law firm that's maintaining your minute books, is if the company ever gets sued, if you're on vacation and it's good service against the registered office at your house and you're on holidays for 2 weeks, they can know you default, win the lawsuit before you even know the lawsuit happened. If it goes to the law firm that's your registered office, the lawyers can deal with it, at least until you return. They can put things off, and then it can be dealt with in the normal course. You're not like taking 3 steps back. Next is in terms of the ownership structure itself. So if you own your business with a number of other people, there's going to be tax reasons, there's going to be logistical reasons, there's going to be reasons for decision making on how you structure that business. So it's going to be important for you to make sure that you connect your lawyer and your accountant and yourself to make sure that we put together a package for you that reflects what works best for your company. And no two businesses are the same. There's going to be very specific things in terms of what your corporate structure looks like. Last, failing to follow legal advice. This happens all the time to lawyers. You tell a client, whatever you do not do this. You could get sued for whatever. And the person does just that. And then they get sued for that whatever. When your lawyer is telling you something, remember your lawyer has your best interest at heart. There's going to be times where you make business decisions versus legal decisions, but it's going to be really important for you to know what those choices are, and not only what your different options are, but what the consequences of each of those options are, and then make an informed choice. If your lawyer is telling you there's a really good reason for you not to do this, you probably want to really pay attention to that. Maybe you make a business decision and you take a chance that you might get sued, or maybe you make a business decision where, notwithstanding that that's the advice you gave from a lawyer, you're going to do something else. But if you want to protect your business, that's going to be a key part, is paying attention to it and at least modifying your plans to try and figure out what's the best way of doing something without having risk or minimizing your risk. Anyway, if you love your business, you've grown it, you've worked hard, you want to protect your business, really pay attention to these simple steps to make sure that your success continues for many years to come.